I'm Michael Serapio, and you're listening to The Bureau Chiefs, a primetime politics podcast from CPAC. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Around the table right now are Robert Fife, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. Hello to all three of you.
Hi, Michael.
Hello. So listen, let's get right into it. Topic number one for this week, a constitution for Quebec. And as we know, Quebec has never signed the Constitution Act of 1982, but on Thursday, the government of François Legault did introduce a draft proposal for a Quebec constitution, a document that the government says affirms Quebec's distinct national character, but one that could also create more tension between the province and Ottawa. Take a listen right now to Quebec's Justice Minister, who answered a question on this proposal earlier in the week.
What do you say to Quebecers about the raison d'être of this Quebec Constitution?
I say to them that's a will for over 200 years, and that's really important for Quebecers to be able to recognize themselves in a constitution that will protect, strengthen, and unite them.
Okay, Joël-Denis, I'm going to get you to start us off this week because this constitution proposal, as outlined in the draft, would, among other things, affirm French as the only common language in Quebec. It would affirm secularism, also the equality of men and women. Why this proposal? Why now?
Well, it came out a bit of nowhere. There was no consultation made by the Quebec government, and as you know, the Legault government is in deep trouble, poll-wise, and I think it's a way to try to stir the Quebec nationalism so that people who have went over the Parti Québécois come back to the Coalition Avenir Québec. But I don't think it's going to work because as in everywhere else in Canada, in Quebec, the main issue is cost of living, rising cost of living and also access to a home, buying to property. So it's an attempt by a desperate government trying desperately to get back into the political game, and we're a year away from the Quebec election. The election is expected in October 2026, so it's the last, I think, attempt by François Legault to stir back people in his way. And remember, he had a big cabinet shuffle, threw out some members out of his cabinet in an attempt to rejig his government. It has failed to do that, and if an election was held today, the Coalition Avenir government would be obliterated on the political scene.
So a political move here for François Legault's political survival. Although, if adopted, and even if not adopted, it raises things like enshrining into this Quebec Constitution this idea that it would be Quebec that would name candidates for the Senate as well as the Supreme Court, that it would be Quebec that would name a candidate for... I'll get to it in a second. But like, it would be a candidate for even Governor General, which would actually be Lieutenant Governor, which would not be Vice-Regal, but an officer of Quebec moving away from the monarchy. So it does create the potential for tension between Quebec City and Ottawa.
Some of those are non-starters legally and judicially in Canada. Those questions have already been tested and settled at the Supreme Court, which has accorded not to provinces the right to name senators or a governor general or have a say, and that's the federal government. So what I think, though, is really interesting, it's a bit of a wake-up call, though, to, I think, the Mark Carney government, which isn't paying a whole lot of attention to Quebec politics right now. It's so much focused on the economy and trade and, diversifying defense and economy ties that I think it's just not on their radar, the fact that in the next year there is going to be a Quebec election and the specter of separatism back in our political conversation nationally. And I don't sense that they've got their finger on the pulse of that yet. They're not considering it. I'm told, is it weighing into everything? Is that a lens that's being put on everything? No, it's just it's not their lens. Their lens is the economy and trade. And so I think it's a wake-up call.
And what's telling of that is yesterday when the media was asking members of cabinet as they were walking in and out of the cabinet caucus their reaction to this Quebec Constitution, all of them basically answered, well, I haven't looked at it yet. I haven't read it yet. So that underlines what you're saying. Someone should have sent them lines out yesterday morning.
Well,
we'll see what happens when Parliament gets back. Bob Rob, what do you make of this? Because as I say, a real potential for conflict here between the province and the federal government.
I don't see it the same way. I don't think it's that much of a conflict. Already, in terms of the senators, they don't have any authority. I mean, the federal government will announce whoever they want to announce, and there's nothing. You can have whatever you want. It's not going to make any difference. The federal government usually does consult with the province about who is going to be the lieutenant governor. That's sort of a respectful thing that's already in place. And in terms of the other measures in the bill, that's sort of, we all accept that with Quebec. That Quebec has a right to protect its language and its culture. I suppose the only thing that is a bit controversial is the fact that this Constitution would forbid anybody who gets federal money to be able to challenge, using the courts to challenge parts of the Constitution, particularly dealing with secularism and whatnot. Although we've gone through that ourselves with Stephen Harper. When he did the court challenges program, he got rid of that. It was a very similar program. But on balance, to me, this doesn't seem to be, I mean, ZD may speak better to me on this issue than me, but...
As somebody who has watched the separatist movement and separatist federalist debate in Quebec, I'm more worried about the future of Alberta in Canada than Quebec leaving the nation because of pipeline politics. And that is a bigger issue, and also because of the kind of referendum that Madame Smith, the Premier in Alberta, is ready to allow to go on. It's like you put out the dentifrice out of the tube, but you can't get it back, so it becomes a political bomb. And in Quebec, the separatist issue is not on the radar right now, and young people are not bragging for a referendum tomorrow, and leads me to think that the future of Canada is more at stake between Ottawa and Alberta than Quebec and Ottawa for the first time, because when Mr. Legault announced this, it barely made the news in Quebec. We talked about the visit of Mr. Carney in Washington, other issues dealing with the big trucks involved in big accident in Quebec on the highways than the Constitution that François Legault would like to adopt.
Although when I saw the story, I will say that it was earlier or late last year we were talking about what would a Poilievre government have to face if in fact Pierre Poilievre became the next prime minister, and part of that equation was the fact that the polls were indicating that the next government in Quebec would be the Parti Québécois, and a possibility of having to deal with a referendum. Does it mean, though, with this proposal that this government's going to have to deal, maybe not with a referendum, but how to deal with Quebec nationalism at a time when it's really, to your point, not on their radar?
But the François Legault government is trying to stir the pot of identity politics, of nationalism, but so far it has failed, because whenever Mr. Legault talks, it's like the other mandate of Justin Trudeau. Nobody's listening to him anymore. So it's a big swipe, but it's a swipe in the water. It doesn't have any political consequences so far, I would say.
But a wake-up call for the government at the very least?
It could be, but it depends how the Parti Québécois tries to take the claims of that. But again, the issues dominating the mind of Quebecers is cost of living, access to housing, property access, not political shenanigans about the Constitution.
But I think, Michael, to your point, is that we always have to be careful about how we manage Quebec. It can go very quickly in a direction that is not very good for the country. Nationalism is a dangerous phenomenon in Quebec, and this government has not really had to deal with it, but the potential always lies there for any government.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll watch and see where that goes. Let's switch our topic right now. You mentioned Mark Carney in Washington, and yes, the Prime Minister did go to Washington this week. He met with Donald Trump. Some nice words were exchanged, but since that meeting, we heard from the U.S. Commerce Secretary on Wednesday. He says any future deal on the auto industry will necessarily include tariffs. And then today, on Friday, Mark Carney talked about, just how difficult it has and continues to be to negotiate a path forward. Take a listen to the Prime Minister from Friday.
This is not one simple, as if any trade deal is simple, but one simple trade deal which will resolve all the issues, and that's why we're focused on retaining the huge advantage that we have relative to the rest of the world through USMCA, that 85%, the lowest tariff of any country, and working hard on these sectors where we're looking for things that other countries have not received.
Okay. Again, the Prime Minister from Friday. You know, I will say, you know, I was in Washington, and I was watching everything that goes down, and obviously we don't know what the path forward is at this moment in time. But I think there is now bits and pieces that we are forming an idea of what a future trade relationship with the United States is going to be. And I'll immediately put out there, no tariffs across the board is not that future. I'm kind of wondering from what you're hearing, Bob, what you see emerging on the trade front between Canada and the United States.
Well, first of all, that was a surprisingly good meeting for the Prime Minister with the President of the United States. Federal officials going into this had no idea how this was going to turn out. Nobody does when you're dealing with Donald Trump. He was very complimentary about the Prime Minister, effusive in some ways. Even after the working lunch, they stayed over and they were socializing. Everything was really good, and there has been real momentum now in these talks. Dominic LeBlanc, who's in charge of U.S. trade, and our Canadian ambassador, Kristen Hillman, and as well as the clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Serapio, stayed over after that meeting. They've been making significant progress. I believe that Mr. LeBlanc will be going back early next week to continue these talks, to build on the momentum of what happened out of that. But nobody should be under any illusion that we are going to face tariffs. We are going to face probably quotas on either automobiles or steel, or probably not aluminum, because Americans do need our aluminum. The world has changed. This is a tariff president, and we're not going to be tariff-free at all. It's not going to be whatever agreement we get out of this is not going to be great, but it's going to be better than it is now. It's still going to allow Pierre Poilievre to get up in the House of Commons and say, you promised elbows up, you promised to get a good deal for Canada. This is not a good deal. We're never going to get a good deal out of this president. But we're going to try to get the best deal we possibly can.
Mm-hmm. Tonda, a picture emerging for you as to what the trade relationship is going to look like going forward?
Well, I think we've all seen what the Prime Minister and others have said this week, that it's looking like separate deals on the various sectors that are now hit by tariffs that range anywhere from 10% on energy and potash to up to 50% on steel and aluminum. Separate deals on those sectors. When that happens, it's not clear to me. And then an overall review. Nobody's saying it's going to be a renegotiation of the CUSMA/USMCA. But it will be. It will be that. And we've also very clearly seen that Trump is not committed to that. Like, maybe a trilateral deal, or maybe deals that he does separately with Canada and Mexico. So I think there are a lot of questions about what the shape of all of that looks like. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's refreshing to hear the Carney government finally admit that zero tariffs future is not in the future. We've known that since really Trump came to Canada in Kananaskis when he said, Mark wants a different deal, I want tariffs. That's been clear from the American side. It just hasn't been as clear from the Canadian side, and I think it is now.
Yeah, you know, in the White House, Donald Trump said that it's going to be a deal the Canadians, I think, are going to be happy about. But I think that's compared with other trade partners of the United States, not from the Canadian vantage point of what would make us happy.
Well,
Joël-Denis.
The testimony of Dominic LeBlanc, the minister in charge of Canada-U.S. trade relationship, last week in front of the Senate was very telling. He said that we're not going back to what was the nostalgia of the last 25 years. This is over. And so the machinery of government in Ottawa, Mr. Carney and his key ministers, are completely saying that we are going to deal with tariffs with the United States, because the United States has decided to charge a fee to get access to their market, their prize market, to everybody in the world, no exclusion for Canada. So what is left for Canada is trying to save, the basic structure of a free trade that work for the Canada in the future with the UMCA review that is coming up next year. But clearly, we are under no illusion. Tariffs will be part of the deal.
Yeah. I think
and the other thing is that what the Carney government has realized that to deal with Donald Trump, you have to get his attention for a while so that he gives instructions to his officials to do things. Mm-hmm. In the past, it was officials doing things and bringing it to the president. Now it's the reverse more, because at the end of the day, the only person who will decide that is going to be Mark Carney, not Mark Carney, but the President, Donald Trump, not anybody around him. He's going to make the final decision.
I do think there's one other element of what a future deal or deals will look like, and the Prime Minister signaled that pretty clearly. It's going to involve trillions of dollars of Canadian investment in U.S. Manufacturing or companies or sectors. The Prime Minister said if we can come to some arrangement, potentially if things can continue down a good path, $1 trillion of Canadian investment over the next 5 years in the U.S. What we don't know if that's public or private investment. I've had business leaders tell me that we already would be doing that amount of business down the States anyway. But to me, it also signals there'll be an element of public investment, be it via defense procurement or what have you. But I think all the deals you've seen Trump do on trade with Japan, Korea, the EU, the UK, all involve an element of commitments to spend in the U.S.
Well, I think that there are very serious political problems for the Prime Minister. He's going to try to get the best deal he possibly can, but we ain't going back. And you're already seeing Premier Ford coming out criticizing the Prime Minister. You're seeing Webb Canoes in Manitoba criticizing the Prime Minister. You're seeing the people in the auto sector coming out. The lumber sector was out just recently saying, well, what about us? You never mentioned us. All of these sectors of the Canadian economy that are going to be hit with tariffs of some kind and probably some kind of quotas are not going to be happy. It's going to be a very dicey political situation for the Prime Minister. It's just not going to be Pierre Poilievre standing, or the Bloc Québécois leader of the NDP criticizing him in the House of Commons. You're going to have important sectors of the Canadian economy criticizing him too. And that is the nature of this country. It's complicated and it's hard to govern.
And Bob raised a good question. How much consultation there is with the premiers? Mr. Carney has been, running a tight ship on this one. In the past, he's had regular meetings with the premiers, either virtually or in person. When was the last time he met with the premiers to inform them of the status of those negotiations? Because they have stakes in those negotiations.
There's a reason for this, though. These negotiations are under a very severe cone of silence, and any kind of leakage could throw everything off. So I understand why they're doing that.
And also, bear in mind that coming out of that, and there is the criticism that you came back to Canada, Mr. Carney, without a deal. We've heard that from the opposition leader. However, from the PMO side, they say that they are now working hard on aluminum, steel, and energy, and they suspect in a few weeks' time that there will be substantial movement on these issues, whether it's a deal or not.
My understanding is substantial movement has already happened in the last few days. But nobody can until the president signs off on it.
But it is a small window, though, and the tension you're talking about. Doug Ford, he wants counter tariffs to be applied, right? That's what he wants at this moment in time. But given how small this window is, it's also the political balancing act of getting him to step back.
Tariffs. We're too small of a country. We're 40 million people. Market of 350 million. We can't get into a trade war with the United States.
Yeah. Well. Okay. Well, we're going to monitor, see where it goes for the next few weeks.
Unless we use the energy card, but that was,
that's never not
going to be happening.
Not under this Prime Minister.
No.
Yeah, well, as I say, we're going to watch and see where that goes. We knew this one was going to be a long topic. Okay, listen, before we go, I also want to squeeze in another topic here before we get to our yeas and nays and everything else. And that has to do with the fact that Parliament is not here next week. They're adjourned. It's the break week for Parliament. Thought it would be a good time to get your assessment of this Prime Minister's performance since Parliament's return. Of course, he came back promising to get things done at speeds that we've never seen before. How speedy has it been, Bob? What do you think of these 4 weeks of Parliament's return so far?
Well, leaving Parliament aside, he's actually done an awful lot in a short period of time. We've got some infrastructure programs that are underway. We've got the Major Projects Office built up. We've got a new defense investment agency and he's staffed those with serious people from outside. We are in the midst of a budget that is, I think, what we understand is going to be quite a significant budget, one that we haven't seen in quite a number of years. In terms of the parliamentary performance, I think he's doing okay. He's showing a sense of humor. If anything, he's a little too strident in how he responds. Yelling in question period. He'll learn You don't have to yell to get your points across in the House of Commons. But on the whole, he pretty much holds his own against Pierre Poilievre, who spent all his life in Parliament. No, I think he's done fine in Parliament. But we've got some real tests ahead of time. He's got to get a deal with the Americans, and he's got to sell a budget that is going to not only make cuts to the civil servants, but presumably try to demonstrate to the country that he is really serious about trying to transform the Canadian economy, which he says he wants to do.
Mm-hmm. And be more fiscally prudent than the last government, because that was also one of the promises made. Tonda, what do you think of the performance of Mark Carney so far?
Well, I mean, I'm not here to do a performance review, but I do think that, to Bob's point, he's moved quickly inside government, doing things that we don't necessarily have a great window on in terms of setting things in motion. But I think the bigger test for Mark Carney is not how he performs against Pierre Poilievre necessarily in Parliament. It's how he delivers on his pretty ambitious promises. And so we don't have a whole lot of a window on the behind the scenes of how some of those efforts are going and working. And so the marker of success will be delivery for him, won't it? I do think that one thing we reported this week that the government is in talks with the Bloc and the NDP about allocating more funding to them. And everybody's saying that's not related to the budget. But to me, that does it shows a couple of things. A little bit of political naivete in a way, because the Bloc Québécois and the NDP don't have the electoral result to merit all those extra funds. But there is a bit of a negotiation clearly going on about how they can all get along better in a minority parliament. So that shows a little bit of political adaptability on Carney's part. And I guess we'll see more of it as the minority parliament goes on, especially if he does manage to deliver on some of those promises. He's going to need big bucks to do some of it, and we'll see that in the budget.
JD?
I am impressed with his performance in the House of Commons, because remember, he's been sitting in that place for less than 5 months, so he adjusted quickly from a position of being served by everybody, and now being the servant in the House of Commons, if I may say, as Prime Minister, and answering tough questions from Pierre Poilievre. Poilievre is also holding his own since his back, but overall I would say he's done the transition quite well from a career banker to now a Prime Minister and a politician. And his performance also outside of the House of Commons. He's been traveling a lot, trying to get deals for Canada. He went to Mexico and Europe often. He's going to be traveling again in Asia for some summits over there. So he's been putting Canada on the map, and Canada is being noticed more since he's been Prime Minister than under the previous governments, I would say.
Okay. And as I said, we are now into an adjournment next week, so we'll catch our breath before they return. But before we're done today, a quick look right now for our yays and our nays. Bob, I'll get you to start us out.
The government made the right decision this week to pull a bill, Bill C2, that would have it went way too far in terms of giving the police and authorities access to our phones, our private information, too much power in terms of all the borders. I mean, they had to pull back because civil liberty organizations were outraged, but more important, even the conservatives, which tend to be law and order, said we will not support this legislation because it has gone way, way too far. So kudos to them for doing that, although they might have gone away with it. They had a majority, and they don't have a majority, so they couldn't get away with it.
Okay. And a nay?
The nay on this is that the minister, public safety minister, is still saying he wants to figure out a way to allow the police to have not to get a judge's warrant to get access to your phone or to your computer. That's not acceptable.
Tonda?
Yeah, I agree on the nay. I was going to go with Howard Lutnick's comments behind closed doors the morning after what seemed to be a mutually successful meeting where they at least were talking about progress. And I think for Lutnick to state what he stated to the country this week has the potential to do the opposite of what the Americans say they want, which is they want Canadians to travel and come and put American booze back on the shelves and get along and wreck it. But I think his remarks were so antagonistic to so many people that it might have had the opposite effect. So, and as for yays, I actually also was going to go with the border bill, pulling it, but they've still hived it off and they still hope to save it. So let me switch. So I'll give a yay to, even though there weren't concrete outcomes from the Washington meetings yet, it's kind of hard to disagree that Carney should have gone down there. Like he clearly is making some inroads with this unpredictable president. So that's, I think, an upside. Did he have to go so far as to flatter Mr. Trump the way he did in the Oval Office? I think there are a lot of different views on that. But you can't argue with the fact that they're getting a hearing that they weren't getting before.
Yeah, absolutely. Joël-Denis.
My yay goes to the Finance Minister, François-Philippe Champagne, for making a permanent decision. The federal government will be tabled now in the fall, always. This will give more predictability to provinces, municipalities, investors, and builders. And it will also give me more predictability to plan my winter vacation. So
I can go in February now.
Knowing when the budget will be tabled, so that's a good plus. And my nay goes also to Howard Lutnick. We're in a free trade area, trying to solve our differences, and that Mr. Lutnick had the gall, that's the word, that's
right.
Not something else.
Or something else that rhymes with that.
to depart from,
G-rated, Tonda, G-rated. Yes, Joël-Denis.
Going from a visit that was seen as, a courtesy visit, and less than a few hours after the departure of the Prime Minister to say what he said about how he sees Canada's place in the world and with the United States, that was just unacceptable. And to me, my nay goes from Ottawa to Washington to Howard Lutnick.
Jaws were dropping in that room.
Yeah, you know what? I as I said, I was in Washington, and I was surprised because the PMO was saying we don't know what's going to come out of this meeting in the Oval Office. So it came out very positive, and then shocked when I saw that article the next day about Lutnick's comments. So you're not alone on that. Okay, and before we wrap up this week, I want you guys to take a look ahead to next week. Bob, anything in the agenda, given that there is an adjournment? Someone's ready for a party. It's not spring break.
All eyes should be on Dominic LeBlanc. He will be going back to Washington next week, and let's hope he's successful in the negotiations that are going on.
Yeah. Tonda?
Yeah, I mean, it is a parliamentary break, so the Commons committees and whatnot aren't sitting. But I think that there are tensions within the Premier's and the Prime Minister's office around what's the next step. And there's a bit of navigating that has to happen. BC is really not on board with a pipeline. Alberta's making all kinds of threats. And so, Carney's not immediately going anywhere next week. He's going to Asia after that. But there seems to me to be a bit of fence mending that needs to happen, or a bit of kind of national leadership. So I'll look to see if there's any of that on offer next week.
Okay.
I'll surprise you. I'll be watching the provincial election in Newfoundland and Labrador, which is taking place on Tuesday. Yeah. Because there's a big deal between Quebec and Newfoundland and Labrador on electricity development, and between Quebec, Hydro-Quebec, and the provincial electricity board in Newfoundland. So the result of those elections, the elections, is very important for the future of that deal. If the Conservative Party wins, they have promised to put this deal to referendum. So some uncertainty is brought into that.
I mean, it won't surprise you that the Liberals are predicting the Liberals will win.
Although, and far be it for me to tell the Newfoundlander, I will say that I was speaking to someone who had access to a private poll and says it's much closer than what was being predicted. So I think Tuesday might be very interesting to watch what happens.
If it doesn't go the way they want it to go, the Liberal government, that is. I mean, it's a bit of a black mark on Michael Sabia's record, because he's the guy who spearheaded that whole thing. And Michael Sabia is now the clerk of the Privy Council, top civil servant in Ottawa.
For the first time in Quebec, we're watching that election very, very closely.
Okay, so something's happening during break week. Listen, Bob, Tonda, Joël-Denis, a pleasure always. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that is our episode for the week. I'm Michael Serapio. We are down next week because of the parliamentary adjournment, but we're back the week after. Until then, take care. You have been listening to the Bureau Chiefs with Michael Serapio, a Prime Times Politics podcast from CPAC.